are here maybe that have used either Seesaw or Google Classroom for the first time this year, what are some maybe more broad challenges that you've had, whether it was getting students on board or if you kind of felt like maybe little technical challenges were particularly challenging? And if anybody wants to unmute themselves and talk, you're welcome to have the floor. So Hannah said, parents understanding and navigating platforms. So that's definitely a different kind of challenge where we might be used to having students, students that we could have worked with them at school to kind of get them educated on using whichever platform we're using, and then they're kind of going home and adapting. I know some people were needing to do a lot of this on the fly, so maybe they hadn't rolled out. I work with at the elementary level. I know that was definitely a challenge that I had heard, was that students that don't typically take their devices home, they were taking their devices home or being provided devices, and they were kind of having to get on a platform for the first time and be accessing it with some regularity at home. So I think that was definitely a challenge. Are there any of my tech folks that want to speak to that, kind of that process of rolling out if your students had not previously had a lot of, maybe weren't taking their devices home?
I'll be brave and chime in.
Yay!
Ashley LaCroix, pre-K through 5 tech integrator at Brunswick. It wasn't so much the devices as many of our teachers actually had the moment of, how do I physically get the login to the families? Like, yeah. How do I email? How do I process this whole thing as they're being bombarded with, we're closing, this is where the buses are going to be feeding you. This is where, there was that shuffle of organizing the login and the how to log in information. And, a lot of the programs they wanted to use may not spit out logins in a very easy way to email. So then it was like, how do we teach you to screenshot and then attach that to an email? And then, so the process of getting the login was challenging for some of our staff.
Nice. And Mark shared in the chat, nice user-friendly resource. So I think that's one of the considerations to be making for next year, is if you have a platform that you're going to be using, and certainly we don't know exactly what's going to be happening. So I think at this point, the best thing is maybe to just be planning what is the best way to be distributing that information. It'd be much easier to just say, we're going to have to mail this home, and it's going to have all of the information that they're going to need for the variety of platforms that students are going to need to be accessing. And I mean, certainly that's a consideration to be making. We didn't have that luxury, many of us, in March. So I think we kind of have the benefit of summer that we can hopefully plan some of those pieces. And those are, certainly it's nice to have that. Having worked in elementary classes for a long time, that's something that I've seen, is that teachers just often have those pieces of information up in their room, or have I've seen like teachers have like little flip charts that have all of the students' login information, so students can access that if they need to. So I think that's definitely something to be thinking about. Don't feel like if you're putting all that work in that it's going to be wasted. It's nice to have all the information collected in one place for getting started in the school year, just as a matter of efficiency. I'm reading the chat some other things that people have.
I see some interest in kind of talking about how Google and Seesaw might work together. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's anyone on this call who's using both of them together that might want to talk about how they talk to each other, and how smooth that process is or not smooth.
Um, well, what we ended up having was Seesaw used at the elementary and Google Classroom used at the middle school and high school. But Seesaw is set up so that it can work really well with Google Drive. So if you have files on Google Drive of any kind, any Google files, you can transfer them directly or link them directly inside Seesaw for any activity or journal post. So they're designed to work really well together, but Seesaw is kind of like its own platform, similar to Google Classroom. So I don't think you would use both, but you certainly could post a Seesaw activity in Google Classroom as a link, and it would take you to that activity even without being in a Seesaw account. So they're interchangeable, but they're different. The Google Classroom, I think, it wouldn't make sense to do both Seesaw and Google Classroom because they'd be redundant.
Yeah. It's an interesting point about storing things on Google Drive. When we had a call as part of our EdTech series, Lindsay Davis from Leroy Smith up in Winterport joined us, and as a Seesaw ambassador, she had a lot of useful tips and kind of suggestions for how teachers might use it within their classroom. So that is available on the DOE website. So certainly something to look back if people are interested in that. But one of the things that she was saying is that sometimes recording things within Seesaw can be really challenging, you know, things taking a long time to process and upload and stuff like that. And I don't know if people have had success recording videos and then uploading them in one platform or another, just if it seems like the uploading speed is faster. That might be an interesting fact to find out about.
There was an ask about the link to that. I dropped the link to the DOE page where all of the recordings for the webinars have been posted. So you'll find the Seesaw and Google Classroom recordings on that page.
Yeah. And I think that explaining to families, I think trying to think about what are some of the best ways to do that. Because obviously you're going to have students that they're, you know, some families are going to be, you know, feel comfortable picking up and learning that, or if they've been using Seesaw at school, then it's something they've been familiar with, or Google Classroom, if they're used to that connection. But you're going to have a lot of families that they're not going to be, and it's going to be extremely important. And for next year, if they're needing to shift from one to another, Seesaw, if you have just kind of the individual teacher accounts, you'd have to completely set up a new classroom with new students and all that. So that process is going to almost need to be done all over again. If you do Seesaw for schools, I think is what it's called, it's kind of like a site license. The benefit of that is that once your students are in the system, the contact with parents are in the system, then it's easy to transfer those things along. And having worked at IT at a school, I can say that the management part of it on the IT end is very easy. So to be able to do that, I think it was nice to be able to take that off teachers' plates, to have, you know, just I was able to pull rosters from other places and move them around in there. And I thought that it was nice to be able to do that. But for many teachers, if they're using Seesaw just within their classroom, and a lot of schools don't opt for the site license, then they're having to do that individually. So just a consideration to be making is that a teacher would have to do that all over again, you know, for a new classroom in the fall.
And I throw in too, I encourage my teachers as much as possible to use Google Login with Seesaw, because it knits all of those student profiles together. So if you don't have Seesaw tools, you can't merge student accounts. Teachers that were using Seesaw in classrooms before, they had to struggle with the home codes and figuring that out again. But the single Google identity that kind of it brings all rings together, right? Yeah. Like all the rings. It makes it simpler too from a parent perspective, because I don't have like 8 identities of my child to kind of like follow up on. It lists as one child, and then I can look at the various journals. So it's the Google login is I'd highly recommend as a system. And then if you have Chromebooks at the lower grades, you can sync that with Clever Login. So kids can use the QR code to get into their Chromebooks, and then they're already logged into Seesaw with their Google accounts. So it makes it a very smooth process.
Yeah. So I think that, yeah, that's definitely a consideration to be making as well. Speaking of the Chromebooks and I'm kind of curious because I haven't been in contact with a lot of schools individually, but those schools that received the Connect for Me Chromebooks from the state, I'm just curious if that process of tying them into their system, if they had a system, and distributing from students, I'm kind of just curious how that went, and getting onto some of these systems like Google Classroom and Seesaw, if students were getting those devices new for the first time, what were kind of some of the steps and challenges there that they might have run into? Maybe there is nobody that's gonna has insight into that. Okay, well, if you come across somebody, send them my way. But I think that communication piece, to like Seth was just saying, like making that as easy as you can for parents is certainly a consideration to be making. I know a lot of teachers, when they're rolling out Seesaw or Google Classroom, one of the things they would do is during an open house or an event like that, they'd be able to make connections with parents. And sometimes it was like right there walking them through downloading the app on their phone and showing them how to use it. So that might be something to think about if if we have that luxury in the fall of having an open house, then maybe planning for something like that. And if we don't have that luxury, how might you get those resources to parents so they have that information, just so they can get on that first time? And certainly part of it, I think, like the example with the single Google login, it's fantastic if you have that structure set up in place. It really allows you to jump from app to app and not run into all of those individual account problems, especially where many of our schools, you're bound to have at least a few different accounts for, your not only learning management systems, but like student information systems and things like that. So bound to have a few. If you can minimize some of them, that's for everyone's benefit. Trying to see if there's anything in the chat, kind of questions or that might be kind of in there. And some people have kind of shared some useful tidbits in there. Is there anyone, just because this has been a topic that's come up, is there anyone that's using as kind of your primary, if we're going to call these two learning management systems, is there anybody who is using something other than one of these two? Or is your school, looking to go in the direction of everybody using the same thing, maybe? Okay, so it's mandatory. So Josh, does your district provide, any kind of training, or what's kind of the support structures in place for your teachers?
We have had multiple trainings, because even before, the kids all have Chromebooks, and even before any of this happened, they were really encouraging us to use. They didn't mandate Google Classroom. That's starting next year. It was one of them. But anyway, yes, they have had trainings, but every training I've gone to has been by sort of a tech person who doesn't have any, it's not a person in education in tech. It's just a tech person. So it's this tsunami of possibilities without a single educational idea. Like
Yeah.
it can do this, 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 but none of that ever comes together into a lesson. Or so I can figure out any software there is, and I have done, but what I need somebody to say to me is, here's something you haven't thought of doing with it. And just sort of laying out all of its technical possibilities doesn't spark that idea in my mind. So it's better to sort of get people's ideas.
Yep.
I can read any manual to anything.
And I think that's a good point, because I think one of the challenges in terms of providing support at the state level is that people are using, a wide variety of platforms and tools and things like that, but people want to know how to really use it out in the field. I mean, I can give a broad overview of any number of things, but I don't know how useful that would be all the time. I think at some level people want to see what are the ways that people are using these tools within their classroom, kind of what are the challenges they're running into, and just kind of being able to put it more in a realistic context of how it's actually going to look or seem likely to look within their own classroom. So I think that's definitely one of the challenges that we're seeing out there. And I think one of the kind of narratives that I like is that there isn't really a silver bullet out there. Someone might try to sell you a silver bullet over the summer saying, coming back in the fall, this is what you're going to need. But I don't know that exists. I think probably the best we can do is just kind of learn from one another, and having opportunities like this in some way to share some ideas or share some challenges, because there are people that are looking for, and there's some on this call that are trying to determine what are those challenges that their staff might run into, just to be able to prepare themselves to support their staff in the best way that they can. And then I think the other part of that is there are people that are starting to use these platforms, but how can I, move it beyond just kind of the basic setup? What are other things that I can tie in or pull into it? How can I do more than just the same old? Yeah, so exactly that. So playing distance learning strengths rather than feeling like you're just trying to work around. So Emma and I think things that's going to be exciting about our remote learning 101 session is really to be thinking about that. There are lots of lessons I think that we've all learned from this time period. I think we've probably seen some things that have gone well, maybe in surprising ways, and things that have been very challenging, and days that you're just like, you know what, it would be so much easier if we were back in school because X, Y, and Z would be perfect and we wouldn't have to deal with these other different challenges. But I think something like remote learning, if you have the time and energy, I know that's going to be an important one this summer, but the time and energy to plan and be really thoughtful about your remote learning whenever that comes about, whether that, or not when it comes about, but whatever that ends up looking like, probably in the fall, whether that's like a blended model or purely, distance learning, kids at home, teachers at home, everyone at home. I think if we have that time and can really think about it critically, then we can really play to a lot of the strengths of that style. And I think for some people, the challenge that they ran into is that they were, thrust into having to do this. And it really is like emergency education. It's not the ideal situation for remote learning in any shape or form. That isn't something you should be planning, on March 14th. It's something that you should be planning well ahead of time. So I think that's one of the things to be kind of thinking about is, and I understand it's going to be a challenge over the summer for teachers to dedicate some time and energy to be kind of thinking and planning. So I think one of the things that Emma and I are hoping to do is to help teachers recognize what are some of the tools that you can use and you can maybe pivot more effectively. So if we're going back in the fall, you can still use them. If we are having smaller classrooms and some sort of blended model, then you can still use them. If we're all still at home, you can still use them. I think that's to me what makes the most sense. And I think probably a lot of people, now that they've had some time that they've been using Classroom or Seesaw, maybe they haven't before, or if they're having to record themselves, if they're needing to do video conferences with students, a lot of these are going to be new ways of capturing learning opportunities to share with students, new ways of communicating with students. And I think that the challenge here is to really figure out how can we do these things maybe better in the fall if we have some time to plan. And understanding that we didn't have time to plan, people did the best they can. It's still, a lot of people are still in crisis mode and just trying to survive, get to the end of the year. And it was the last week of school for a lot of people. Just get to that point and then, start making a plan at some point, maybe in the end of July or early August, once people have had some time to refresh themselves. So a couple questions about the Remote Learning 101. So Emma, are you dropping that link in there? She might be. So we are doing a series. We had the first one this morning. The videos are going to be available. So the intent was to really take a long look and kind of break down the pieces of doing remote learning as opposed to just kind of, trying to play catch up. So I think that was the idea. Thank you, Emma, for sharing that. So the schedule, we'll have those sessions and you're certainly welcome to join them live if you're able to, but if you're not able to, then connecting in at a later time, watching the videos, getting those contact hours and stuff like that, but hopefully it will help people with some of the thinking around planning and best practices and stuff like that. So Class Dojo, and I did see somebody earlier in there mentioned using Facebook to connect with. So I'm not sure who would put the piece about Facebook. So I'm kind of curious about that. Is that just kind of the model that was in place, so it made sense to continue with using that?
I believe that was Chelsea who wrote that in the chat. Chelsea, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Hi. Yes, my whole school has a Facebook page per classroom, but we just continued it, and I had other teachers who would use that, and then also do Google Classroom, but it just seemed crazy to me to be posting on 2 different platforms, and it seemed overwhelming and more work for the teacher and for the parents. So I teach pre-K, so it seemed to work pretty well, but I would like a more like school-based off of Facebook platform if we have to do it next year.
Yeah. And I think definitely for, the younger model, pre-K, kindergarten, first, second grade, I think Seesaw is something that I think a lot of educators use across the state. They have pretty robust trainings available through their website. So that's definitely something, if you wanted to dabble in that would be maybe a suggestion. I mean, one of the reasons we were offering this focus today is because these really seem like the 2 major platforms that we're seeing people use. I did see somebody mention Class Dojo in the list, and there's some other ones, Schoology, that I know some schools are using, and I don't know if we have anybody on the call that's using or have used one of those, but there are definitely other platforms out there. I think just the interest would be in, for a lot of people, is kind of what makes sense to use for my school, and oftentimes it's what am I going to be able to get the support that I need if they're not necessarily somebody that's going to go out and find something different on their own. A lot of times it's kind of what support that I can get. So having some tech integrator folks on the line, they might want to chime in and say, does it seem like it's easier for you to provide support if there's a certain level of consistency to what staff are using?
That's definitely the case. And it's easier to, I tell teachers that I become like expert in tools in seasons, right? So like you'll get to know a platform really well while people are using it and you're new to it, but then you move on to something else. And then meanwhile that app updates and has all kinds of new features that you miss. And so constantly playing catch up. And so being able to focus on a couple and really understand the questions and kind of dive into them more deeply on a regular basis is easier. And it's unquestionably easier for parents. So we're really focusing in our district at settling in specifically on Seesaw and Classroom, because then everybody is on the same page and like we're speaking the same language and parents know where to go to find information and they're not having to guess. So
Yeah, and I think kind of the people putting things in the chat kind of reiterating that, it's easier to provide that support. It's easier, if all of your parents are getting on one platform, then it's easy to just have that one thing that they're sending out to share. I know some districts have kind of a vetting process with technology that they use and really try to avoid having teachers get out and try all of these different things. And as someone who was very experimental when I was in the classroom, it's fun to be trying all those different tools. But I think there's just kind of the recognition that if you're doing that, you might not necessarily have a lot of in-house support if you're trying a lot of different things. So I think just having that kind of recognition is probably something to keep in mind. Yeah, and what Mark said, I think that's definitely a key point, is to kind of keep students and, keep them as the focus. Trying to think of, sometimes I think, might select a tool just because it's kind of, familiarity or something like that, or we stick with something because that's what we're familiar with. And it might not be the best tool. It might, be out of date. There might be something that works a little bit more effectively, or maybe you're just trying to do something very specific and there's one tool that might be easier if you just focus on that one thing. So I think that's definitely a consideration to be making as well, as what's going to work best for your students. And I think certainly considering like teachers and families and part of that whole process as well. So I'll be curious if any districts are going to be, making some decisions over the summer in terms of what tools to use or, not to use. I think that's something to maybe be having those conversations with administration, maybe be broaching that topic if it's something they haven't decided on.
Yeah, I think it comes the point that Mark was making. It's interesting because in this remote learning environment, when you have, and of course in the classroom, although in the classroom you're able to provide a little bit more support. So, in the remote learning environment, the student, if it's a new tool, they have to learn the tool and then they have to learn whatever it is that you're trying to teach them with the tool. So there's like that added step of needing to learn that and considering the cognitive load and, how the learning curve of the tools. Some tools are really easy to learn and kids will pick up on it really fast, and others, you can also kind of gauge by how long it might have taken you to explore the tool, and kind of if it took you a while, then it might take your students a little bit longer. But sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it might take you longer to learn something and your students pick up on it, and like that. So one thing that we talk a lot about is that idea of trying to ask your students for feedback and ask them how things are going and what's working well for them, and incorporate them in that process of choosing tools. And you might try something out, but did they like it? Did it go well for them? And if you ask them and they say the majority of them are really enthusiastic about it, then that you've got a tool that you should keep exploring further and see what else you can do with it because it was successful.
So we did have a question. Does Google Classroom, what's kind of the story on Google Classroom in parent connections? And you definitely, I mean, you can connect and pull parents in and have them connected. It's a little bit different than like Seesaw. There, people could, make comments. It's a little more, I don't want to say like social media-ish, but I mean, they're able to give feedback in a little bit different way. Whereas I don't think Google Classroom has really those type of features. And Parent Square I haven't used Parent Square before, but I definitely have talked with people about it. Thanks for stopping by, Ashley. So I'm not sure if there are any people that are maybe using both Seesaw, not at the same time, but maybe within a school is using Seesaw and Google Classroom, and if they kind of notice any differences in terms of parent engagement.
Yeah, with us, the elementary kids use the Seesaw, and there is a lot of back and forth. Seesaw has a really good parent notification, so that you can. It's a lot like Facebook. You can do a blanket message, or you could do individual messages to parents and family members, and then they can private message you back. And so it's a pretty robust two-way communication. With Google Classroom, I haven't seen parents use that to make comments. They can use the Gmail to talk to the teachers, but it isn't like you can say something about a specific piece of work very easily.
Yeah.
Whereas in Seesaw, you can make comments to the piece of work itself. So I think it also allows you to have several family members with the family app. So every time the kid posts something, it pops up on all the family members. Thing. So I think it's a little bit more engaging with more family members, and it has an easier communication channel.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Nathaniel Porter from Appleton and Hope, and thank you, Mark, for that. That's very helpful. I have a middle school teacher who has Google Classroom. They're using that, but they took on Seesaw a couple of years ago, kind of as a parent communication tool. And this year, and unfortunately, I can't tell you what he's doing, but he really loves having both of them. And I think, just from being part of this discussion right now, it is that parent communication piece that's working for him. And it simplifies, as we've all are trying to do, reducing all the logins and platforms that parents have to be juggling in their minds for all the kids they may have in their household. That was a way that was really successful for him. And he was very excited about some pretty close connections between Seesaw and Google Classroom, that you could make that kind of talk to each other. And I'm at the point, I have 2 schools, K-8 schools, that I'm at the point where we're trying to kind of bring it down a little bit to Seesaw. And I think it will be Seesaw and Google Classroom, and who uses what and how will be the question. So that's why I'm here, and I appreciate all the info from you folks. Thanks.
Well, I mean, definitely is interesting discussion to have. I tend to see the cutoff, just from what I've seen from communicating with schools and stuff like that, that often like Seesaw kind of cuts off in kind of late elementary, and then Google Classroom kind of picks up. But certainly I think that ease of communication between parent, student, and teacher, I think that part of it definitely is something worth exploring, and maybe it would make sense to kind of tie in that piece. A lot of times schools have kind of other communication tools that they use, beyond email, but I mean, it might be, a blast system like Remind, that they're just sending stuff out. And I think sometimes finding the best ways to kind of have conversations with parents, kind of a continuous thread, I think that's probably one of the challenges. I'm here. And certainly I think right now, obviously, hopefully students and parents are for the most part right together in quarantine or whatnot. So I think those communications maybe are a little bit easier now in some ways, and that they're right. I know for my own kids, it's been much easier because I can say, hey, look at this email I got from your teacher. But I think maybe once things go back to school, there'll be kind of that stretch again. So it might be good to think about a system in terms of that. If things are working right now, they might not work in the same way going back into the classroom. So that's certainly a consideration to be kind of thinking about as we think about pivoting from one situation to another. But that's just something to be thinking about. I know there are some people on here that probably are more using one of these platforms for the first time this year. Is there anybody that kind of got on using one of these for the first time that wants to speak to, some of the things that they like, strengths, weaknesses, challenges, things that made you crazy?
I'm just going to make a quick, the challenges and what good thing that is come of it is just initiating or responding when kids are on and they do their lessons and they're following up with their work, just following up, well, good for you, and using their names and letting them know that what they're doing and what their work is done is being looked at, and they don't spend a lot of time. But now this is like the catch-up week, and we're going in doing things that should have been done maybe like a month ago. And for those that are on and doing it, I'm good for you. I see you. You're following up. You're doing your work, and that's important, and it's being noticed. So that's all. Just letting them know that you're seeing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And, simple as that. Engaging.
And I think definitely that's a consideration to be making, just kind of with the remote learning situation, is that it's really important to be giving, as much feedback as you can, because you don't have the benefit of being there in person and giving that kind of face-to-face feedback. So it's almost like you have to go beyond to give that feedback, so it really comes through. So I think that's definitely a consideration to be making.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of feedback models, is there anybody that kind of has any suggestions for, ways to do that, ways to maybe streamline that? I know my wife's a high school teacher, so I think trying to get feedback on all the work that she was getting from her students, I think quickly became overwhelming, because you had a lot of students, or especially early on. I think we kind of had a drop after April vacation, and then things spread out a little bit more. So you'd have these booms of kids getting stuff. So the comment bank in Google Classroom suggestion. And I think the other thing was having kind of all those things right in one spot that can be useful, as opposed to, needing to photocopy something for a student if you don't have it right there when they need it, or trying to scan it to send it in an email or something like that. If you have all of those things living in Google Classroom, that can be helpful.
One of the things I took away from this period that I'm going to carry forward, even if we ever go back to a real building, is I'm not accepting C and D work anymore, because we were instructed, let them redo everything. We're trying to do no harm. We're trying to make this as painless as possible, I sort of hit, like, all of that came together just right. And I realized, why am I accepting D work from kids, putting a D on it and going, there you go? No, they did everything over as many times as it took them to get an A. And every single kid who passed on their own merits this term, and not because I passed them out of the do no harm directive, got much better grades than they would have had in school, because somehow the combination of distance learning with technology and having the record in Google Docs of, hey, you didn't resolve those comments I made, and all of that sort of came together to change my attitude about grades and achievement. And that, why am I accepting substandard work from kids and saying, okay, this is a C here, you know, and teaching them that that's what they should be doing. So I feel like moving forward, I'm going to give A's and F's, and that's it. Or at least that's my dream.
The hard pass fail.
Well, no, really, if I'm giving you an opportunity to do everything, I want them to learn it. Yeah. I didn't become a teacher because I love putting A through F in different boxes and things. And I don't think any of us did. So that's not what I want them to do. I want them to learn it. And if they have to do it 6 times, do it 6 times. And plus it sets them up for failure. If I'm letting them not really master something because of the way our grading system works, and then we go on to the next concept, but they have, you know, it's not fair to them either. So I've had a total rethink about everything.
That's a great
Interesting
reflection.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting because in an asynchronous tech environment, you know, that mastery that you refer to, I think becomes even more important. You know, it's not just about, did they, you know, are they keeping up with the class? You know, it becomes, are they, you know, they're isolated. So are they lost? Are they by themselves? Like, you can't just walk around the room, you know, and gauge how your students are doing. So anytime you can provide them with that opportunity to gain mastery when they, you know, otherwise wouldn't have had that opportunity, I think it's awesome. So I want to, oh, go ahead, John.
No, go.
Okay, well, this is like totally different thought. So if yours is adding on, just
go ahead. Go for it.
Okay, all right. Is anyone using Bitmoji in their Google Classroom or their Seesaw classroom? Or do you know of anyone who is?
Yeah, I do. The Spanish teacher at my school who went down the Seesaw rabbit hole and then, you know, totally got into Bitmoji, loves it. My daughter is in her class. My daughter thinks she's the greatest right now. It's like, wow, she's really rocking it. So, you know, personally, I'm like, okay, whatever. But I'm seeing results, and she is as well. She's very excited about it. And I think she located most of her resources on like a Facebook group, I think maybe for world language teachers or something. And she's really, really having positive feedback from that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? No, I see, Mark, you put that Bitmoji is not allowed within your school network somehow. It's very interesting. So for anyone who may not be familiar with what Bitmoji is, it's basically just a tool that allows you to build your own avatar. So you have like this little cartoon character of yourself, and then you can like set your cartoon character up with these different like phrases or in a different scene. If you really want to see what can be done with it and you have a Facebook page, there is a Facebook page called the Bitmoji Craze for Educators. And I have learned so much about what can be done with Bitmoji through just that one Facebook group. And a lot of the stuff that's put on there is free to share. It's basically just teachers helping teachers kind of leverage this tool. It integrates really well with Google Classroom and Seesaw. So if you're looking for a way to kind of get a little bit more engagement, a little bit more interaction, make things a little bit more fun, Bitmoji might be a really good next step for you to consider.
Thank you.
I think a lot of teachers that use Seesaw, I think for years, it seemed like the two have just gone hand in hand. with one another. So I think that was, at least that's been my experience.
So John and I each have our own Bitmoji. I'm
Yeah.
hoping you're seeing my screen.
Yes.
So like we haven't really done a whole lot with it, but you know, you can take your little character, you know, pick whichever form you want it to be in, and you can kind of put it in your classroom, you can put it in a slide deck, you can put it literally anywhere. At that point it becomes an image. So I want to say the possibilities are endless, but I'm sure there's an end. It's just nearly endless.
When we definitely, I saw kind of the trend showing up, kind of enjoyed a little surge recently, but also the building of a Bitmoji classroom. And I think actually I was talking with an art teacher yesterday, and she was saying that she had pulled in like actual pictures from her own class. And she said it's so weird how like kids have been so excited about that, because it's like, oh my gosh, it looks just like your class. And it's so, I mean, to think about it seems kind of like a surreal kind of situation, that kids are so excited to see some kind of visual representation of a class that they had been in early on the school year. But I think it speaks to something of the magic that happens at school, like the communities that are built within that space. So, and certainly at the early elementary level especially, I think trying to figure out, if we can't go back physically, what are some ways that we can make connections with students, because it's going to be really difficult. And I mean, I'm thinking like those pre-K, K kids that, I mean, it's so vitally important to be building those, you know, early relationships with their teachers and kind of making those connections. It's so important. But I mean, it's also important really for high school kids, you know, at the other end of the spectrum. I know, like I said, my wife is a high school teacher, and she said it's been really difficult for some of her students not having those regular, you know, conversations with their teachers and making those connections that they might not even really think about it, you know, day to day, that it's so important in making this connection with my teachers that I see throughout the day. But once that stuff is just taken away from you, it's been really difficult, I know, for a lot of her kiddos.
I see Josh asked a question about school districts being concerned about some of the legal issues and confidentiality concerns about Zoom. I'll preface this by saying that Zoom has put out an upgrade that is going to mitigate, like, I would say 90% of some of those concerns, but Bitmoji and avatars are a really great way to help add a layer of protection to your students. You know, there's a lot of things that John and I like to suggest to protect student information in video conferencing. You know, you can have students only, you know, put their first names. I think a lot of the vulnerability that still exists that's kind of hard to mitigate, although Bitmoji could help with this in some ways, although not for probably a video conference, is just that idea that somebody could take a picture of the screen and it has, you know, pictures of students with names and things of that nature. So that can be kind of hard to control, but Bitmoji definitely can help to add a layer of protection to your students. If you have them use that, you know, instead of like posting a picture of themselves, they could post a picture of their avatar and things of that nature. So it can help, definitely. Oh, this is a great question about Bitmoji not being required on the phone. I don't know that you can set up your Bitmoji without a phone, but I do know that once you have it set up, you can, there's a Chrome extension that you can add to your Chrome browser, and then you just click on that and it'll drop down a whole list of like images, and you can search, like you could type in a keyword and do it that way. I could actually show you real quick if you want. We've only got a minute, but I'll show you real quick. So you kind of have to, I think you have to set it up on your phone. I couldn't find a way around that, but once you have it set up, do you see my Google Drive? I don't know if I chose the right screen or not.
No, we're seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, hang on. How about now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I got two screens, sorry. So this is the little Bitmoji Chrome add-on. And so I could, you know, type in, you know, great job, and it'll come up with some different options. And then I could click this and drag it to someplace, like if I had someplace ready to go, which I clearly don't. But that would be your easiest way to start integrating this, like in a simplistic way without having to get too complicated. You can just save images to your computer as well. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but I'm pretty certain that oh yeah, Mark, that's a great point. You could probably use the tablet. You do need the app, I think is what it is. You can't just go to bitmoji.com on your computer. You will need to use the app to set up your Bitmoji. But once you have it set up, you can go all over the place with it.
Yeah, so I think that will, obviously, if we ever do our Bitmoji session that we've joked about doing, we'll have to figure out all of those possibilities.
Elizabeth, if your students have an iPad, that would likely work as well. I don't know. Does anybody know if Chromebook has a Bitmoji app? I haven't.
Well, like
looked
if
into
you
that.
could, because a lot of Chromebooks, like you can access the
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 App Store.
Android store, yeah, the App Store, or not the App Store, the Google Play Store.
Right.
But I haven't tried that out.
I mean, I imagine that would work. I just don't know. It depends on if your Chromebooks are locked down or not, and what your district has configured on those.
Good to know.
I've got a question. I've got a MacBook Air.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I go to find the Bitmoji? I have it on my phone. Where would I go to download it?
Do you have a Chrome web browser on your MacBook? Or are you using Safari?
No, Chrome.
Okay, yeah, so you should be able to go to your Chrome web browser, type in a Google search for Bitmoji Chrome extension, and then you should just be able to hit that add button.
Okay, can you stay on after this is over and walk me through that?
Yeah, I probably have a couple minutes I can help you with that.
We've been setting up more video kind of things with our kids and saying, oh, you know, this is what we're going to do this summer and have a nice summer. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can hold up a piece of paper and that's it. And that would be wonderful. I have not seen that done yet. And I live with Bitmoji.
Well, also when I haven't actually seen this, but somebody was telling me about using Chatterpix, and you could actually use your Bitmoji and make it talk. You could add in your own voice to it, which could be cool, could be cool, could be creepy. It kind of depends on what the final product is, but I think there's a lot of potential there to do some fun stuff. And I think the big challenge we're seeing is engaging students. So
yes,
even if it's silly, if it gets kids engaged, then it's,
if you're giggling, they're probably giggling.
All right, well, we are right up against 4 o'clock, so I guess we'll kind of bring this to an end. I did not see your Bitmoji plug happening at the end.
I couldn't help it.
I'm glad you were able to get that in. Hopefully in addition to that, people found some good information here, good conversations to be having going into the summer and thinking